Hello friends, today we are going to talk about a reason why autism is so poorly understood in government. My theory is that there are no autistic ministers, and why is that? Because there are no autistic members of parliament. As far as I can tell, there is not a single autistic member of parliament in the Commons or the Lords out of a possible 1,455 possible candidates. And not only that, there weren't any in the last parliament either. Going by conservative estimates of the number of autistic people in the UK, with 1,455 members of parliament, there should be at least 14, and if we take the UCL's top estimate of 3%, there should be 43 or 44. To reiterate, there are none, at least none who are diagnosed. ADHD fares slightly better. The Labour MP Olivia Blake has talked about having ADHD, but she was only diagnosed a couple of years ago while she was already a parliamentarian, when ideally she should have been diagnosed in school and potentially had some accommodations made to help her at that time. As far as I can tell, she is the only member of parliament with either autism or ADHD. And for context, NHS England estimates that between 3 and 4% of people have ADHD in the country, and international figures suggest that that number might even be higher. So, in this episode, we are going to delve into why neurodivergent people are completely unrepresented, what the effect of this is, and why we should have better representation. This is fairly simple with the House of Lords. The House of Lords is mostly made up of people who are appointed, theoretically on the basis of their expertise in certain fields or long service in office, although quite often this is used as a form of cronyism. At the time of writing, there are 805 sitting members, 88 of which are hereditary, and 25 of which are there for religious reasons. Usually it's 92 and 26, but some of them have died. That leaves us with 692 lords, none of whom are autistic. This is a political choice carried out by successive prime ministers over the last 30 years. Not once has a prime minister appointed an autistic person to scrutinise legislation. It is possible, considering the average age of the lords is 71, that there are a number of lords who are undiagnosed, but as far as we know, there aren't. With the House of Commons, it is far more complicated. You could look at the different ways the parties choose their candidates, or how the first past the post electoral system may influence the makeup of the Commons. But what it really comes down to is likability. Neurotypical people have been proven in study after study not to like autistic people on a subconscious level. There is a beginning of a consensus that neurotypical people have just as hard a time as reading neurodivergent people as vice versa. This is sometimes referred to as the double empathy problem, although I have some issues with the phraseology. For the last 80 years, it has been said by every scientist that autistic people are disabled because they cannot read subtle body language or have difficulty gauging tone and put more emphasis on what is said rather than how it is said. When in actuality, what we have is a different method of communication that is just as indecipherable to normal people. In fact, it's more direct, straightforward, there are less games, and an ignorance of the unwritten social norms of the majority, which makes us less predictable and can throw neurotypical people off balance by not acting how they expect. So, we're going to look at some psychological studies now, guys. It's going to be fun, right? Sasson et al. Concluded that a lot of the difficulties that autistic people have with social interactions are the result of first impressions of them formed by neurotypical people, who make what Sasson calls thin slice judgments, which are based off of autistic traits. These are made within seconds and do not change with more time to get to know the person, and are consistent regardless of age. After being shown 10 seconds of video, audio, or transcript, neurotypical perceivers were significantly more likely to consider an autistic person more awkward, less approachable, and said they were almost twice as likely to be friends with a neurotypical person as with an autistic person. They also deduced this had less to do with the content of what an autistic person was saying, as the negative impressions were only really present when the participants were shown video and audio footage of autistic people, and not the transcript of what they were saying. In fact, the transcript of autistic people was rated mostly the same as neurotypical transcripts, and only when the video was added was the difference appreciated, with the impressions of the control group going up and the impression of the autistic group going down. In 2019, Alkhaldi, Sheppard and Mitchel asked whether there was a link between neurotypicals' inability to read autistic people and autistic people being perceived as unfavourable by neurotypicals. They used a similar methodology to Sasson et al., filming 40 people between the ages of 13 and 21, 20 of whom were autistic. They filmed them as they reacted to a certain stimulus from the researcher, which was either a compliment, a joke, a story, or simply waiting. They showed these clips to non-autistic people who then rated them on a variety of social factors, such as how awkward they are, how attractive, how dominant, intelligent, empathetic, likeable, what's their self-esteem like. The researchers took a mean of these scores, and across every category they found that the perceivers rated neurotypical people more positively than autistic people, with the exception that in the cases where the people were filmed waiting, where there was no social interaction, it was neck and neck. In 2023, the same type of study was carried out with autistic children by Boucher et al., where again, neurotypical undergrads were shown the transcript, video, and audio, and like all the studies above, the raters did not know that some of the children were autistic. Predictably, again, the autistic children were rated worse than the non-autistic children, and it was noted that the partial reason for this is they made less eye contact, which is a classic autistic trait. After this, the raters did a questionnaire designed to work out the biases of the people who are doing the ratings towards autism. And building on other studies, they discussed how explicit bias can be reduced through education, but implicit or subconscious bias is less affected by education. On average, non-autistic adults have more prejudices than non-autistic children, which shows that these biases are taught rather than intrinsic. And so there is a long-term possibility of a higher acceptance of neurodivergent people in the future, but we're talking, 50 years of social change here minimum, really, in my personal opinion. So you might be thinking, Samuel, what has any of this got to do with politics? Why have you bored me with psychology for the last, how many minutes? Well, how we are perceived affects how people treat you. First impressions are important. They determine whether you get a job, the outcome of a trial even, whether you get accepted in a social circle, and yes, how people vote. So if the vast majority of people perceive you as less dominant, less attractive, less intelligent, empathetic, or intelligent than your opponents, however much I think that elections should be about political issues, in most races the vote will be close enough where people's view of the candidates, feelings about them, and subconscious bias will influence their vote enough to make a difference. The way that the first past the post system works is that there will never be a plurality of neurodivergent voters in any one constituency who would not be subconsciously bothered by the differences in communication style, at least to a degree. That is assuming that the party members or leadership selects autistic people as candidates in the first place. Even if the leadership is aware of autism and does not have a conscious bias themselves, they understand that autistic traits such as difficulty making eye contact are seen as untrustworthy traits and even signs of lying among neurotypical people, and therefore would make the political judgment not to select an autistic person because they do not believe that an autistic person can win an election based on the prejudices of the average neurotypical voter. This, of course, would be playing fast and loose with the Equality Act of 2010 and the government's own guidance in 2012, which requires that parties allow disabled people to run for elections. But proving discrimination in a case such as this would be really quite challenging. Therefore, getting into the House of Commons is incredibly difficult for an autistic person, as they would be prejudged based on differences in communication style and are viewed less favourably than their neurotypical opponents at both the party and constituency level, before their political ideas are even taken into account. The lack of representation in Parliament means that there is a gap between the understanding of law and policymakers and autistic people. MPs have to know a little information about a lot of issues, and you cannot expect most MPs to have enough expertise on this issue. I'm not saying that neurotypical people cannot be fabulous advocates for neurodivergent people, and there are MPs and peers, especially in the Autism All-Party Parliamentary Group, who have dedicated a lot of effort to champion autistic people. But as far as I am aware, none of them know what it is like to be an autistic person. If this were any other group of people, whether it's women, ethnic minorities, or LGBT+, the argument would be made and has been made that these groups should have a right to equal representation in Parliament because they have a perspective that others don't, that cannot be seen by the establishment, that they make up a society and so the legislature should reflect them. They may have expertise and experience that escapes the dominant culture, and 1,000 other good reasons why women, ethnic minorities, and LGBT people should have representation in Parliament corresponding to their size in society, if not larger. In the Autism Act of 2009, not a single autistic person debated or voted on the issue in either house. No diagnosed autistic person has ever been a minister in the Department of Education or Health and Social Care or Work and Pensions or Housing, all areas, as we will see in the next episode, that have significant inequalities for neurodivergent people. It is not enough for governments and political parties to acknowledge just the need for disability representation in Parliament, which is already underrepresented. There should be 136 disabled people in proportion to the population, when in actuality disabled MPs rarely scrape double digits. There needs to be an acknowledgement for the need for diversity in disability representation, that a paralysed person doesn't necessarily understand what it is like to be autistic or have ADHD any more than I understand what it's like to be blind. The government has already said they want to reform the House of Lords. Why not be radical and provide an upper house which, in addition to its composition of experts in their fields, also represents the society in which we live? Thank you for watching to the end, guys. I know this was a little bit longer. If you wouldn't mind sharing this video or looking at the other ones, I would really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Have a good day.